Hey everyone, I am so excited to be live here with someone new that actually we just met recently on LinkedIn, but he has some similar passions of mine to help freelancers. And so thank you so much, Jason Nelson. He's the founder and principal of Apollus Solutions for being here and sharing your wisdom with this audience. I previously had my friend Michelle Cooper on, who owns an accounting firm, and we talked about accounting 101, and we went into some of the high level overview basics about accounting. And so I'm thinking of this more like accounting 201 and diving a little bit deeper, getting a little bit more nitty gritty and practical with this discussion. So thank you so much, Jason, for being here. And I'm excited to dive into this topic.
Oh, Rachel, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Well, you and I connected over a common thread of serving freelancers. And I love that you are a freelancer yourself. So really have a unique perspective on the way that you serve some of your clients, not all of whom are freelancers, but tell us the story of even your journey to solopreneurship and how that started.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I actually grew up as someone who swore that I never wanted to be an entrepreneur or my own boss. My father is a small business owner. He's a licensed funeral director and mortician and co-owns a funeral home here in North Carolina. So I grew up in and around that business, not quite 6 feet under from the
That's probably good. Yeah.
But he was also a tobacco farmer. And I always say that farmers, I think, are the ultimate entrepreneurs and
Absolutely.
how to do more with less. And my grandfather was a farmer. My great grandfather was a farmer. My paternal grandmother was what I consider a necessity-driven entrepreneur. She started a dressmaking and seamstress business out of her living room after some health concerns. She was no longer able to farm. And so I grew up around entrepreneurs and business owners.
It's in your blood.
It is, but I also saw the 24/7 commitments that all of these people made. And I thought, I don't want one of those 24/7 jobs. I want one of those cush office jobs with a corner office. And so I eventually went off to college. I studied accounting, my first job out of college. I worked for a Fortune 500 company in internal audit and thought that I was going to be on a rocket ship to a corner office by the time I was 30.
Yeah.
But after doing it for a while, I realized that wasn't what I really wanted to do each day, day in and day out. And so I eventually went to graduate school, studying public and nonprofit management, spent some time in the Peace Corps, later worked in economic development here in North Carolina, later worked for a software as a service company, and also did a short stint in market research. And it was when I was with that market research company, I got approached by a woman who is now a client of mine. So this would have been fall of 2017.
Okay.
She was launching an organization, getting it off the ground, and she and I knew each other from a previous line of work. And she said, I'd just love to buy 5 to 10 hours of your time to do some back office management as I get this off the ground. And I thought, great, this is a side hustle. I'm looking for something to do on the side, make a little travel money.
That's right.
And into 2018, the organization began to grow and scale. And she came back to me time and time again and said, I'd love to buy more of your time. And I kept thinking, I don't have any more time to sell. I have a full-time job.
Right.
I'm doing this on the side. And then finally, the summer of 2018, she said, I'd like to buy upwards of 20 to 25 hours of your time per week. And that for me became the game changer. Rachel, in an instant, it was as if my entire world shifted. I suddenly saw everything differently. I thought, if she's willing to buy that much of my time,
that's right,
then I can figure out how to sell the rest of it. And so I set out to come up with a company name. I created a logo, made business cards, bought a G Suite account.
All the basics,
all the basics, formed an LLC. And I thought, at a minimum, I'm going to fake it until I make it.
Yep.
And a little over 2 years later, here we are.
I love it. I love that too, because really you saw the opportunity. Some of it came to you, whether that was the universe gifting that to you or not. But then you took the opportunity and seized it and said, well, I'm going to make something full time out of this, which is also really, I think, empowering and scary at the same time. I'm sure there's a little bit of fear from leaving the full time job too.
Oh, totally. And it's that sense of, if there's no element of fear or risk involved, then I have to stop and ask myself how worth it is this particular opportunity. And
that's
for me,
and
for me, I think looking back over the course of my life and looking at my childhood and all those years, I said, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. Everything I was running away from ultimately is what I actually wanted. I wanted the freedom and the flexibility and the autonomy. I just never knew how to articulate that in the traditional workforce. And so it wasn't until I ventured out on my own, I discovered that I could set my own schedule, set my own hours, have really dynamic relationships with clients where they just want really good work product. They aren't concerned if I do it. They don't care if I'm doing it at my house or if I'm doing it at a coffee shop. They just want really good work, and they want someone that they can rely on and someone that they can trust. And when I recognized that I could create that kind of work experience for myself, everything shifted.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Well, I want to kick off a little bit of our time together by talking about just some definitions. So you specifically work with micro businesses, which I loved that term because I've heard of microfinancing, but I would love for you to define that. And then even for us to define bookkeeping, because I think anything related to accounting just causes people, to start getting immediate anxiety. So I want to help kind of clarify what we're talking about when we say bookkeeping, and also just for you and you serving your clients, what do you mean by micro businesses?
Sure. So for me, I leaned into that definition over the course of this past summer. I decided that I wanted to redefine my service offering a bit and develop more of a niche. And so I looked at I looked at my current client base and thought, what are the common denominators? What do these things have in common? Yeah. And if I want to grow my revenue base, what are the types of clients that I really want? And so I recognize that all of my clients fall under a particular revenue level, and they typically have very few employees. And so when doing some research, I discovered the term micro business, which for me, I define as generally under $2 million in revenue a year and fewer than 10 employees. And if you were to Google or search the term micro business, loosely you'll see some variations in how that's defined. So some people will define it as a million or less. I went up a bit to 2 million, and then on the number of employee side, it's generally fewer than 10 employees. Honestly, my sweet spot is actually fewer than probably 5 employees, because where I tend to do my best work is when there's a CEO or executive director or owner operator and maybe 1 or 2 other employees, and each of them has their own functional area of expertise.
Sure.
And so there's usually some combination of one of them is doing some accounting and bookkeeping, and it's usually not something that they enjoy.
But their favorite area of expertise, sure.
But they know they have to do it, and they know it needs to get done. And so that's where I can provide a low cost, low overhead alternative, relieve them of that stress and chaos of dealing with accounting and bookkeeping, and then they can recommit their time and focus on what's most important to them in their business.
It's so smart. We're going to talk about outsourcing a little later in our conversation, but let's talk about what is bookkeeping, because I think people are like, they think of like a ledger with like writing down inventory, or that's what I think of. I'm probably aging myself, but when we're talking about bookkeeping and business owners, especially micro businesses, solopreneurs, freelancers, how are we defining that, just to set up the conversation a little bit?
Yeah, so bookkeeping for me really focuses on the recording and tracking of the day-to-day financial transactions and
Yeah.
activities. And it's usually regarded or seen as a subset of accounting. And so when you get into higher level or higher level demands of accounting, you get into sometimes a lot of really intense financial statement reporting. But more on the bookkeeping side, we're talking about, vendor management, tracking vendor payments, invoicing, accounts receivable management, sometimes some payroll elements and functions as well. So it's really those day-to-day nuts and bolts transactions that you are, or that someone like me tracks and monitors.
Perfect. That's so helpful. It's really the ongoing and day-to-day expenses that business owners were both, that are coming out of our checking accounts and that are coming into our checking accounts. So that's great. Well, I would love for you to share with us just kind of how do we as business owners set ourselves up for success when it comes to bookkeeping? What are some of the best practices, or what are some things that we should absolutely know before we start cleaning up our books or whatever it is that we're going to do when it comes to our businesses?
Yes, I always like to start with what I call, or what I consider, the big three, in terms of the most important things that, especially us as freelancers and business owners, need to know related to bookkeeping. And so the first is money in. Can you easily send invoices, track invoice status, and collect payment? And besides, at the end of the day, who doesn't love getting paid? And then the second is what I refer to as money out. Can you easily track business-related expenses? And then the third is taxes. As freelancers, we're typically 1099ers.
Right.
And are we preparing for quarterly estimated tax payment to both the IRS and whatever state revenue agency where you reside?
Right. Perfect.
And I'm sorry, and I was just going to transition into the best practices and using those big three as a guide. So for me, I like to think or start with the best practices through a lens of understanding your business before you decide on any sort of software or online platform.
I love that.
Are you a service business? Are you a product-based business?
Right.
Or are you a combination of both?
Right. Are you tracking inventory versus just hours, for example? Yeah.
And then another element or best practices for me, always, I can't stress this enough, always separate business and personal bank accounts. Commingling can be the death of a great self-employed business operator. No matter how great of an idea you have, no matter how hard you work, that commingling can be a real detriment to the success and the life of your business.
So I say this all the time. Like, it's one of my first things that I do in some of my trainings related to accounting. Keep your business and personal separate. But I was just at lunch with a friend today who has her own business, and she has just one account. And she's like, I know I need to get a new account. So tell us the why behind that. Maybe that'll help people, get more motivated to do that.
Well, I tend to start from a tax perspective. I use the example, let's say you're working with your tax accountant and they're doing your 2020 taxes. So let's just fast forward to 2021. You're looking back at 2020 and they're saying, for all of your business related material, what's your business revenue and what are your business expenses.
Right.
If you have everything commingled, that means you now have to weed through mounds and mounds and mounds of transactions, separating, this was a personal vacation that we took in January, so it's not a business expense, but I bought this one thing at Target and I can't remember if it's a business expense or exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's one about being very clear about here's my personal life, here's my business life.
Right.
But there are all sorts of implications down the line. Are you wanting to buy real estate, for example, and you're going through the underwriting process and you need to be able to articulate what your self-employment income is. That becomes much harder to do if you've commingled.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
And ultimately, if someone asks you a question about your business and says, how profitable was your business last year? If you have everything commingled together, whether someone else is asking you, or if you just want to know, am I actually generating more income than expenses? Can you easily sit down and be able to map out your income and expenses on the personal side and on the business side? And so that's why for me, commingling can be a huge
mess.
That's putting it lightly.
Okay, perfect. So continue on.
Yes. So another is, and this is one of my favorites. So I think it's important to articulate invoice payment terms with clients up front.
Yes.
It should be a part of every contract or service agreement. And my example is, just because we put due upon receipt on an invoice doesn't mean you'll get paid the moment the invoice is delivered.
No, very unlikely.
And so, for example, because I do or I outsource accounting and bookkeeping, I work with a number of my clients in paying their vendor invoices. Okay. I have some clients that, based on what their cash flows are, they may only pay their vendors once a month, at the very end of the month. So if you invoice this client, say on the 5th of the month, and you just threw in due upon receipt, well, you may want to get paid, but they may be in a situation where they simply can't pay you at that particular moment in time. Right. And so I think it's very important and imperative, and this is where I put the onus on us as freelancers to have those conversations up front and be very clear about, these are my payment terms, and understanding whether that client's actually accepting them, because just because you throw it on an invoice doesn't mean the client is going to accept it.
I think that's so true. I always tell people in their contracts, that's one of the things you want to be really clear about, but you're making me think, not only should we put it in our contract, but maybe it's even worth a conversation. Like, hey, I know you signed this proposal. It had these clear payment terms, whether it was, net 15, net 30, whatever it was, due upon receipt. Is that okay with you? So I can, and the way you can even address it, right, is I'm addressing my cash flow as a business owner, and it would be helpful for me to understand your, if you're agreeing to these payment terms, or at least have a conversation of why they might not, and then work with them to come up with something that's mutually beneficial for both of you.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And two other quick things in terms of best practices. I think it's also, going back to the tax issue, preparing set-asides, whether it's with each invoice payment as you receive it, or setting up some sort of monthly cadence. Just set aside a little bit for estimated taxes. You want to be prepared, when you need to make those payments. You don't want to wind up in a situation where it's time for a quarterly estimated payment and you're strapped for cash. So a best practice for me is, one thing I always do is, I take a percentage of whenever I receive an invoice payment, I set aside a percentage and put it into a business savings account. And I use that specifically as my tax holding account. Okay. And so whenever I do make my quarterly payments, I can pull from that account. And then I'm not, after the fact, I'm not trying to figure out, where am I going to, find the funds, to make these quarterly payments. It's just a very quick and easy way for me to be prepared for those quarterly payments.
It's so great. And it's even important, I think, for freelancers and solopreneurs to know, hey, even if you're a sole proprietor, even if you're an S Corp or an LLC, you want to be making estimated quarterly tax payments. I mean, some people I know just do it and they pay this lump sum at the end. But I know for me, I would rather pay, $5,000 every quarter than $20,000 at the end. But you have to make that decision. And then isn't there a penalty based on a certain amount if you don't make actually the quarterly estimated payments? I think it's based on your net profit. So
yeah, I do know there are penalties, and I'm not quite sure how that calculation is made. But as an anecdote, I do know freelancers who went through the course of a calendar year, didn't make any estimated payments,
Yeah.
prepared to do their taxes, thinking that they would wind up getting a refund, only to have that refund completely wiped out because of the penalties of not paying
Oh, yeah.
the
That's such a
estimated taxes.
waste, right?
Yes.
Um,
And then I think there was one last tax thing I was going to add, and this is new for me, with a second business that I launched in August, an e-commerce business. All of a sudden, I'm confronted with collecting sales and use tax. And so for me, this also goes back to what we talked about earlier, Rachel, and understanding your business.
yes.
Are you providing a product or service where collecting sales and use tax is required in the state in which you live? Knowing that is very important, and if you know that, it sets you up to figure out how best to collect those, and then also understand and know how often you need to remit those to the state in which you live.
So important. Yeah, I actually have a friend who started and owns now it's grown into a really big company called TaxJar. And that's all they specialize in, is figuring out, helping e-commerce businesses figure out sales tax for, the state that they are operating out of. And then for, figuring that out from when they have people purchasing from different places. So I'm going to pause for a second because we have a question from my friend Ashley. Hi, Ashley. So she is asking, are there any banks that you'd recommend for a business account? And I have a couple of opinions, but I'd love to hear your answer first.
Yeah, I would say I like to start locally. We're living in a time now, and I'm not saying this because of the pandemic, but just living in a time where physically having to go inside of a bank isn't that necessary anymore. Sure. So there are a lot of online banking options for folks, but I like the comfort of a local bank just in case I ever do need to do any sort of transaction in person. I would check out if and where you have opportunities. Think about credit unions if they offer any sort of business or commercial opportunities, because oftentimes they come with lower fees. Especially freelancing, and if you're just starting out freelancing, I'd love to start from a place of be very mindful of fees, especially with places like banks, because you don't want to give away too much in an effort to make the smart money move. So I just say, look at a lot of different options that are available local. I say start locally and take into consideration what their various service fees are, because you just don't want to get hamstrung and then suddenly you're looking at your statements every month wondering where are all of these fees coming from.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing a lot of them do. I think even as sole proprietors, as sole proprietor, you don't have to open a business checking. A lot of times business checking accounts do have some of those higher fees. I know in my conversation, the Accounting 101 conversation, just to further the separation of church and state between your business and personal, my friend Michelle recommended actually going to a different bank, even to have your business account, even if it's not a business specific account. And of course, if you're an S Corp or an LLC, you have to have a business specific account. But I love that because, I think it's silly to pay, whether it's, $12 to $15 a month. And a lot of that can be avoided by direct deposits or keeping a minimum balance. And so just look into what those fees are. And I think credit unions are always a great option. They tend to have a lot of benefits and lower fees as well. So I think that's great advice. Ashley, hopefully that answered your question. If you have a follow-up, just type it in the chat.
And also on that banking, I'm a big for. So before I went solo, I had been a member of a credit union here in North Carolina, and they didn't have any mobile features whatsoever.
Oh, good point.
So it wasn't until I went solo and opened my business checking accounts that all of a sudden I had access to mobile deposits. And yes, I was late to the game in that regard, but it completely changed my world. So I'm a big mobile app feature person. So one of my first things is always, is there an opportunity, even if it's a bank, do you have mobile features? What are they?
Yeah.
Are they easy to use? It will allow me to do things in a much more robust, easier way, so I'm not having to always log on through a website or always have to go to an ATM.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I remember when mobile deposits became a thing, and it was when I had already started my business. It was about 10 years ago, and I was so happy that I didn't have to drive over to the ATM, especially now. Like, I would definitely don't want to, but that's great. Ashley said thank you, so thanks, Jason, for that. We were talking about best practices, and I think we were maybe done with that portion of it. The last thing we talked about was estimated taxes. So I love this. Your big three: money in, money out, and taxes. So if we're to dive in a little bit deeper on the money in issue, this was one of the things we talked about in Accounting 101. Make it easy to get paid, right? And I'm always telling people, make it automated. Don't use a manual process like Word or Excel or Google Docs to create your invoices. There are too many tools out there that can help you do it for free, that'll help you track it. And then you're not manually having to, chase after clients who haven't paid you. So what are some of your favorite tools to help people when it comes to getting paid?
Yeah, so one of the things I love is, so I use Zoho Books.
Yep. I think a free version too, right? For just invoices is what I
Sure. So their Zoho invoice platform is, I think, really good. It's a basic invoicing platform where you can create the invoice, send it to a client, and integrate some ways for the client to pay.
Like online, like credit card or ACH or something?
Online credit card, ACH. So I say any platform that can allow you, like you were saying, to create the invoice,
right,
track the status of the invoice, track the payment, is very important. It's getting away from the death by spreadsheet or a completely manual process. My big thing when it comes to getting paid is, and I'm gonna probably beat this dead horse, but again, understanding your line of business. So merchant services is really big. So for example, if you've ever bought anything using Stripe, it's the behind the scenes folks who do all of the card payment processing. So those services tack on a fee. So if I charge you $50 or send you an invoice for $50, you pay the $50, but then they take a little bit off of that 50, so I'm not actually getting the 50. That's where I think understanding your volume of business is very important and what your ultimate bottom line is. So, for example, because of the nature of the work that I do, I'm working with a relatively short number of clients over the course of a month to a year.
Sure.
But I'd have some friends who are coaches, and they are working with tens upon multiple clients, sometimes hundreds of clients. And so if you're dealing with a large volume, having a merchant services program that allows someone to pay online quickly with a debit or credit card, ensuring you get your payment within a matter of minutes, if not a couple of days, that can make all the difference in the world. But just be very aware of the details. And so one thing that I did for a one-off project that I did, I normally prefer ACH transfer.
Yeah, 1% fee, right, versus higher.
Well, depending upon the bank, oftentimes ACH transfers are at no cost. So
even better.
So there's no fee for anyone involved. But I did a one-off project, and the client insisted that, or just really wanted to be able to pay using PayPal, which I could easily integrate with my invoicing system. And I thought, well, I don't really want to pay the merchant services fees. So you have to decide, do you want to eat the fees or do you want to bake them into?
Yes, but don't tack them on as a line item, because that is so annoying, I think.
Yes. But I think ultimately for me, it's about awareness. It's, yes, merchant services offer a great way to get paid quickly.
Yes.
But you have to understand that you're paying for that timely payment
Money
processing.
in your bank account. I think it's,
Exactly.
I don't know, I tell people, I think it's totally worth it. I mean, most of the big ones, PayPal, I think it's, Stripe, Square. I know the system I use, it's about 2.9% plus 30 cents per transaction. And sometimes it's more with American Express and less with ACH, sometimes zero. But I think today we have to have an online payment option. We can't say the only way you can pay me is via a check, because who even has checks, first of all? And then you have to put a stamp on it. There's a lot of involvement. So I definitely think it's easy. What's your opinion on having too many ways of getting paid? Like, hey, you can pay me with PayPal or Venmo or Square or, any of these things. Do you have kind of a advice of how we should streamline that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of not globbing on too many merchant services like
Right.
that, because the more that you glob on, that's just the more that you have to manage and to keep up with and to track.
Yes.
And if you're someone who has a bit of an aversion to accounting and bookkeeping, then you probably want to keep it as simple and clean as possible, because
Yes.
the more options, I agree with you. It's important to give clients options to pay and for them to be able to pay quickly, but also keeping in mind that the more options you give,
Yeah.
the more that you're going to have to keep track of.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also quickly want to mention, because I just learned this in a virtual business conference that I was part of in July, but PayPal has an invoice, kind of a credit financing feature for clients. And this especially, I think, is helpful for coaches or people that are working with people on an ongoing basis that might have let's say a $5,000, $10,000 ticket price, and maybe their clients really want to work with them but can't afford $10,000 up front. PayPal has I think it's a 6-month financing at no interest option for your clients that you can offer them, and you just have to you have to go online and get it set up. But that's something that can help people get paid as well, especially if you have kind of a higher ticket. It has to be over $100, your invoice amount. But that can help some of your clients. And, even if it's just a big project fee, whether you're in marketing or something else, that maybe it's a small business you're working with and you get paid faster, and then PayPal is kind of helping them with the financing on the back end.
No, one thing you just mentioned in there, and I don't want to dive too deep down.
No, this is great. That's what this live is for. It's to dive deep.
So one of the things I think is also important to understand, I know that I'm even sensing amongst a lot of freelancers I know, a lot of freelancers are coming together and creating some really interesting collectives and going after projects, kind of essentially creating their own kind of pseudo agency or an agency with no walls, where, you might get a developer or a coder together with a designer, with a marketing strategist, and they combine forces to create like a super team and bid on a project. And so those are, I think, really interesting dynamic ways of going after client projects. But as an accountant and bookkeeper, I'm also very mindful of, even when you're collaborating with folks like that, of being mindful of how is the project structured, who's doing the invoicing, who's getting paid, who's responsible for paying all of the other subs on the project. So again, that for me goes back to that dead horse I'm going to beat. Understand your line of business, understand the people that you're either working with you or working for you. Absolutely. Understand how they need to get paid, how they want to get paid. There are so many dynamics that are at play that if you think through or talk through a lot of that up front, it prevents a lot of headache on the back end.
I think that's so great. I know I often work with subs, and depending on the project, a lot of times I am the ones paying them, and I have them invoice me as soon as I get my first payment from my client, whatever their terms are. Let's say they're charging me 50% of their, their part of the project. But it's important to have those conversations with your subs as well, the same as you're having with your clients as far as payment terms, making sure you're not paying all your subs out before you're getting paid from that client that you're working on that project together with. So I think that's really important too, having just that clarity around that. So thanks for bringing that up. I think that's great. Any other tools that we should know about when it comes to bookkeeping? I know I always encourage people to have kind of if possible, a central, you mentioned Zoho Books, but a central place to do your invoicing that's going to manage and track it, that's going to be able to import your transactions and expenses so you can categorize them. That's going to help you spit out, payroll if needed, or reports like your P&L or balance sheet. Are there any favorite tools like that you use that you can share with us?
Oh yeah, so at several. And before I dive into those, I always like to start with understanding and being honest with myself about what are my must-have versus my not-to-have features, and keep it simple and easy to use. And so I mentioned Zoho Invoice and Zoho Books earlier. Those are two really nice, relatively low-cost platforms. There's also Xero, which is quite popular, Xero spelled with an X, so Xero.
Okay.
There's FreshBooks. There's the classic QuickBooks Online. So whether it's any of those.
I use Wave apps.
Yes, that's also, I've heard good things about. How do you like Wave?
I love it, and I've been using it since the beginning of my business, so 10 years ago, and they keep on developing and adding features, which I appreciate, but it's free for, solopreneurs. And even if you're an S Corp or LLC, unless you are doing payroll services through them, which I do, they do all my payroll tax filing, and it's like $40 a month, which is totally worth it, because I tried to do payroll myself the first quarter I was an S Corp, which was a huge, giant mistake, because not only did it take me hours to figure out I did it wrong and had to have an accountant redo it. So it was silly.
Oh yeah, I set up payroll for one of my clients, and payroll is just one of those things where it requires a lot of patience, because you're dealing with federal taxes and state income taxes, and it can turn nasty quickly.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And so whether it's Zoho, Xero, Wave, FreshBooks, QuickBooks Online, I also am really big right now on time tracking software and ensuring that no matter what platform you're using, it has a built-in time tracking software or time tracking element to it.
If you're running an hourly business?
Well, so
or both.
Yes. So if you're running a business, or you're working with a client or clients based on an hourly rate,
which we don't want you to do, really. I want you to do values-based pricing, but continue.
But also, even if you're in a fixed fee situation, the time tracking, I think, can be a smart move, because it allows you to, no matter what the fixed fee is, it allows you to bounce your actual time worked against that fixed fee.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So is the time we're devoting equating to a good use of our time, or are we giving away services at a discounted rate? And I think there's often the assumption that if I'm in a fixed fee situation, then it's kind of a golden situation. It can certainly feel like it, but it's not always like that. Exactly, it's not always that way, and that's where time tracking comes in really handy. And that for me becomes a segue back to mobile app options. So if you have a good time tracking or a good platform that you like, and it has a time tracking option that is built into a mobile app, no matter where you are, if you just need to jot down 15 minutes, you have the mobile app right there. But there's also collecting receipts. A good example for me is, I need to grab some toner for my printer. So I, hop in my car, go to the Staples real quick, buy my toner. I'm back in the car. I can pull out the app, snap a photo of the receipt. I can code the transaction, save it. It bounces into the cloud. And so I don't even have to worry about holding on to that receipt anymore. and it becomes a way to ease my workflow, and I'm not having to figure out at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, now where's that receipt for that toner that I bought 3 weeks ago? I can track that expense and that receipt on the go, as well as mileage. If you're in a line of business that requires you to track or keep track of your mileage,
Right.
you have a handy dandy app, and you can just jot and notate that really quickly. And I would say, and I would end with a couple of other tools that I think are worth looking into or considering. One is called Bonsai, and the other is called And Company. And they're both all-in-one product suites. And so these are, I did free trials of both of them, and there are elements of them that I liked and that I didn't like.
Sure.
But if you're in a particular line of business, especially as a freelancer, where you're turning over a lot of proposals and projects, these platforms can be really, really good resources, because they allow you to customize proposals via templates inside the system, and then sometimes allow you to submit the proposal to the client for them to review and accept or reject. And then if they accept it, they also allow you to then convert it into a contract, which you can easily update. And then you can shoot that to the client for them to e-sign. And if they e-sign it, you can convert them into a client. And from there, you can even do some invoicing within those systems. And so it creates this kind of one-stop shop where you aren't having to do like things in PDF form and then in your accounting software. It's a nice streamlined process. For me personally, I'm not turning over proposals and contracts that often.
Yeah.
And their bookkeeping and accounting platforms are not robust enough for my liking. So I ultimately didn't go with them. But if you are needing some bare bones accounting and bookkeeping, it can be those all-in-one platforms can be really, really good options.
Perfect. How do you spell Bonsai? Is it Bonzai?
Yeah, Bonsai, Bonsai.
Oh, Bonsai. Okay.
And with And Company, it's and.co.
Okay, I'm gonna put that in the chat just so we have it there. I love that. So I think especially I'm finding this out, even though I'm like you, I don't have a ton of proposals going out all the time, but with contracts, I'm using Doc Hub right now, which is free for up to $5 a month to get e-signatures. So I am taking a PDF and converting it, but I have whatever the proposal is and just converting it and creating signature fields. But yeah, I don't want to have to scan anything anymore. And I think your clients don't want, your clients might not have a printer and scanner at home either. So again, I think this is streamlining your business. It's not directly related to bookkeeping, but it is related to money in. So we want to keep that in mind. I know we talked a little bit about money in, money out. Is there some tools that you have that you like to use to pay vendors, or is it really kind of up to your vendors and what they prefer?
Most of my vendors I try to set up auto payments wherever possible, unless it's a one-off service that I'm purchasing. But for example, I utilize, and I don't recommend this necessarily for everyone. It's a good fit for me, but I utilize a business credit card. Because it allows me to manage my cash flows within my business. Right. And so I will pay my business expenses, everything from my work mobile phone to my home office Wi-Fi to my tax accountant. I will typically just pay through my business credit card. So again, I can capture that business expense and import those transactions into my accounting platform and easily code them. And then likewise, I can capture the receipts when and where possible.
Perfect. I love that. Marco, thanks for joining us. He says QuickBooks can also be a great tool for bookkeepers and accountants. And I know a lot of tax accountants use QuickBooks. I know for me, I actually got a free copy of it when I started my business. I had a friend who works for Intuit, actually several friends, and it was just a little too much for me as a freelancer, solopreneur, but I know people who, love it. It has all of the integrations, from invoicing to taxes. So I think it's a great solution for people. So thanks, Marco, for that comment. I did want to talk a little bit, since we are talking about taxes. October 15th, the next tax filing deadline is coming up. And I am constantly kind of challenging some of my friends and clients who are freelancers to look at their expenses and what they're writing off, because there's some things that we just don't know we can write off. Even if we've been freelancing for a long time. Do you have some of those expenses that we should be considering business expenses that maybe we haven't thought about?
Actually, I'm going to perhaps be a bit provocative here.
Okay.
My experience is that in some ways the opposite occurs.
Oh,
So in many ways, I think this question is timely for a whole host of reasons. But it can be easy to want to reduce our tax liability. So we start accounting for all sorts of business expenses, when sometimes maybe the expense wasn't really a business expense.
Yes, we want to keep that pretty clean and clear. Yeah.
Right. And so I think a little known fact to a lot of people, or specifically a lot of self-employed folks, is that the more that we reduce our income by deducting business expenses, the less that we can wind up paying in Social Security taxes sometimes. And I'm advocating this, but let me preface this by saying I'm not a tax professional, and it's the one area. It's the one area where I will say hire a tax professional.
Yes.
But if you're someone wanting, expecting, or needing to rely on Social Security, then the more that there's some self-inflicted harm we're doing when we're globbing on all the business expenses we can in an effort to just reduce our tax liability. Because if Social Security might be something that you want or need to rely on, you have to be mindful that if you're paying less into the system, then that might be
you'll get less out.
You'll get less out on the back end.
Right.
So I'm a fan of keeping it clean and simple. What's the expense incurred in the operation of your business?
Right.
And that's where I say one of the best things that we can do as freelancers and solopreneurs is to find a really, really good tax professional.
Yes.
And a tax accountant. And I would go a step further and say, look for one who works with a lot of freelancers and solopreneurs.
Great
because
advice.
they'll be able to, we'll speak the same language, and they'll know and understand our concerns in a way that I think just perhaps a generalist in the tax world may not.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know, and I think you're right. I see both sides. I see people, for example, using mileage, getting mileage reimbursement because they have a job that they're driving clients around, like, real estate agents, for example, and then also using their business debit or credit card for gas. And I was like, no, you can't double dip in that. So we have to be careful about that. I think it's important. I know my tax consultant always tells me, if you go out to a business meal and you pay for it, write down the name of that person and the company, because if you ever get audited, you want to be really clear about what that meal was about. So I think that's important. I love your advice of having a mobile expense app so you can just, take a picture of the receipt, right? And then on the flip side, I also think, things like internet. You might use internet for other things at home, but you can't do your business without your internet. I would say that's an okay expense to completely write off. Things like potentially your mobile phone. I know I use my mobile phone for business constantly. It would be really hard to separate out a portion of that. So I write that whole expense out. And again, this is not, you have to talk to your tax professional. This is not tax advice, but just some ideas, and having a tax consultant who specializes in solopreneurs and freelancers will have some of those best practices, some tips for you, making sure you're taking a percentage of your rent or mortgage, right? Depending on your dedicated office space. percentage of your utilities, all of that good stuff. So really diving deep into those things, because that's the benefit, right, of having your own businesses. You can write off some of these things that you can't as a W-2 employee. And that's going to help offset all of the costs that we have that we're paying for ourselves, like health insurance and other things that are coming out of our pockets as solopreneurs that we might have had covered as a W-2 employee.
Yes, and I will say, Rachel, and you alluded to this a little earlier, as it relates to taxes. I think that's also one space where that whole idea of potentially setting up an S corp for payroll purposes, and understanding, because there are some really advantageous opportunities for setting yourself up as an S corp for payroll purposes, and those things are often not talked about a lot. It's for me, it's one of those things I had no idea about it until my tax accountant said,
"Me too.
Have you considered it?" And I thought, well, no, I've never considered it because I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
And he just started like rattling off some real pros and cons of going that route. And so that for me is like ultimately one of the best things that we can outsource is working with a really good seasoned tax professional / accountant.
I love that. Yeah. I always tell people, because I get asked a lot, should I be an LLC or an S corp or a sole proprietor, that they really should consult both with their tax accountant and their business attorney. Because going back to I'm going to beat your dead horse now, understanding your business, what kind of service is it? What state do you live in? There's so many factors to consider. What's your tax situation? Are you filing single or joint, or all of those things? And so I think having a deep understanding of those things and working with professionals who can help you navigate some of those things is really important, which is a great segue into just talking about, you and I have talked a lot about outsourcing, because I know especially when I first started my business, I was like, I'm going to do it all myself because I don't want to pay whatever, right? And kind of being a little cheap about it, if I'm being honest. But, as I've matured in my business, I've also come to see the gigantic benefits of outsourcing. And you have, I think, a really good perspective on outsourcing, not just bookkeeping, but in general. Would you share that with us?
Oh, yeah. So I like to start with, is it a skill that I have?
Yes.
For example, I can visualize something that I want, but I am by no means a graphic designer.
Sure.
Put me in front of InDesign and it might as well be German or Greek. I'm just not going to know what to do.
Yeah.
So I love working with a great designer. For example, I feel fortunate and blessed that one of my best friends is a full-time or freelance graphic designer and creative director.
Ooh, that's a good friend. Yeah.
Pardon me for the shameless plug, but DCW Design, based in Atlanta, is one of the best. And so that's someone I've hired, one of my best friends, to do some really amazing design work. Likewise, I needed some copywriting done several months ago, and I was racking my brain. I was like, everything I'm writing just doesn't sound right. Like, why have I wasted an entire day writing 3 sentences that sound horrible? And that's when I realized, my friend Nate is a great copywriter. So I called Nate, and through a series of conversations, he came up with some amazing content that I now use. But at the end of the day, what I realized is that as freelancers, we have some amazing communities and networks of people, either that locally or that we may know across the country, or in some ways sometimes around the world.
Sure.
And so it becomes a great way to hire and work with other freelancers. And that for me is the sort of thing where it's an opportunity to pay it forward. And to work with some really creative and dynamic folks who are also freelancing. So I'm a big fan of outsourcing, and highly, highly recommend it, especially when it's something that I know I don't have the skill and or time to do.
Yes. Well, let's assume someone doesn't have the bookkeeping, budget tracking, spreadsheet skills. How do freelancers know when it's time to outsource, specifically related to bookkeeping? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think, first of all, I think you have to be able to justify the cost. And in
Yeah.
conjunction with that, can you map or project any sort of return based on the outsourced function?
That's
So are you not getting, is it a function of that you simply aren't able to invoice all of your clients, um, and or you aren't able to work on the collection side to ensure that you're getting paid timely? So
yeah.
I just tend to say it's a combination of, can you justify the cost, and can you actually map or project that if I spend $100 outsourcing this, it will allow me to collect $1,000,
So
for
good.
example. For
Yes.
example, and I think if you can make those justifications and you can make
Yeah.
those alignments, then the outsourcing is worth it.
I agree. I love Marco has another comment. I'm also a freelancer, and I think that outsourcing is the best way to go. You can't do it all on your own. Yes, absolutely, Marco. Honestly, you save more by outsourcing rather than you doing the work all wrong and having to pay to fix it up, which was, my example earlier about payroll taxes, and there are other examples I have of that. So totally agree. I think sometimes we have to look at the ROI might be a time savings. It might not be
Right.
a direct dollar to dollar, but gosh, maybe I know I just recently had this happen where I was playing around on the back end of my website trying to program a pop-up, and I again spent like 3 hours on it, couldn't get it to work right. I was like, why am I not just calling my friend Nick, who's a web programmer and does all my back end stuff? Nick, how much time do you think it would take for you to do this? And it was like, I don't know, an hour and a half. He had it done right. I was like, what? Why do I even bother? Like, I'm still learning this lesson. I'm getting better at it, but I'm still learning this lesson 10 years later. So I think it's a really important, and I love what you said too about freelancers supporting other freelancers. And, we have this community. And so I think sometimes there's also an opportunity not just to pay it forward, but to trade services. So how can you help each
Yes.
other? How can you provide the service that you have and maybe, receive a service that you need? And, it could be a really beautiful, I think, beautiful union that way, and just supporting each other in community. So I think that's great. I don't know if there's any more questions. We'll keep going. But Jason, if people had more questions or wanted to potentially just explore working with you, how do they get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me.
Okay.
If you type in my first name and last name, unfortunately, it's a relatively somewhat common name. So you might have to throw in some filters, but I'm based in Durham, North Carolina. You can also find me at www.apollussolutions.com.
I'll put this up here because we talked earlier about your spelling.
Yeah, you can find me on my website there or shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat and talk. And I think one of the things that I've taken out of the pandemic thus far is I think a lot of us were very, especially as freelancers, learning how to network and collaborate often at in-person events. That was, for a lot of us, that was our bread and butter.
Yeah.
But what I've discovered recently is getting a lot of connection requests and messages on LinkedIn, especially from other freelancers and solopreneurs. And I take a lot of joy and pride in taking 15 to 30 minutes out and chatting with someone who may be on the other side of the country and just finding out, like, what is it that you do? How do you do it? Like, why do you do it? Like, what's your big why? And even if it's not, even if we aren't on, even if you're creative and I'm over here, counting beans and crunching numbers, but still, like, those opportunities to connect have been really invaluable for me the last couple of months, and they seem to be growing in number. It's the new form of networking. So I welcome the opportunity to connect, and whether it's via email or LinkedIn.
I love that. Well, we have a couple of minutes left, and you have a really interesting kind of second business that I wanted to just touch on because I thought it was just such a cool concept. Can you tell us about it?
Oh, sure. So I'll dive into the origin story, but quickly. So let's see, it would have been spring of 2019. Okay. My primary business was up and running and was solid. And I kept thinking, I have a little bit of capacity on my hands. I want to do something creative, something fun, and just dabble in something on the side. And I thought, I just want to create a new side hustle, just see where it goes, create another revenue stream. Maybe it makes $50 a month, maybe it makes 500, maybe it makes 50,000. We'll see. And I threw a whole bunch of ideas up on the board, and nothing really stuck. And then I realized I had a biannual family reunion that was coming up that summer. And family is very important to me. It's the heart and foundation of who I am and what I do, how I do it, and why I do it. And I thought I should do something family reunion related. And so I started conceiving some ideas. And my first idea was I want to create this family reunion toolkit, almost in a box, where if you were planning a reunion, you had all of these resources and you could just like plug and go.
I love that.
And the idea kept ballooning in my head, and it got so large and so big. I thought, I don't have enough capital to even begin creating that thing.
That sounds like a lot of work. Yeah.
Oh, it was a lot of work. I'm like, no one has the time to do all that. But then I remembered I need to think big, but start super small. So what's one little thing in that giant concept that I had that I could basically hit the ground and start running? And I recognize that family reunion t-shirts are often hideous. They're poorly designed and
So
printed
bad.
on
Yeah.
really bad textiles. And in that moment, I said, I wanted to revolutionize the family reunion t-shirt. And so I set off in developing this concept in my head. And ultimately, it turned into what is now Heritage Swag,
Okay,
which
I'm
is
gonna give you your website here.
Why, thank you. I love a good shameless plug. And so Heritage Swag for me is an e-commerce platform where you can personalize t-shirts bearing your family or your family name and celebrate your family as a brand and wear it proudly. And so in essence, I wanted to take those hideous family reunion t-shirts and flip them on their head.
Give them some swag.
Yeah, and give people a shirt that they would want to wear, whether they were hanging out with their friends, going out for a drink, and be able to wear it with a sense of pride and style.
This is not your grandpa's family reunion t-shirt. There's your tagline.
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
you think I'm playing, but I'm writing it down.
Oh man. Well, Jason, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom with us, all of those tools, so many great ones. And I just appreciate you. And I just keep on, reaching out and make sure you guys connect with Jason either on LinkedIn or via his email or website if you want any tips. And that's how we just happen to connect over LinkedIn and just had a lot of synergy. And I feel like I know we're going to stay in touch and make sure that we're continuing to serve the freelance community. So thanks for being here. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you.
Rachel, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, stay cool over there in Durham, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay. Bye.